So welcome back. It is Thursday, July. No, it's not July yet. It's almost July. It's Thursday, June 30th. And we are at the halfway point of the semester. We have exactly as many sessions left as we have done, right? Where does the time go when you're having so much fun? So, and I'm really having fun. I'm having fun with your fallacies and reading through your proposals, of which I am about a little over halfway done with the proposals. I thought I was going to get a little bit further today than I did, but I should have those actually mopped up over the next couple of days. So expect those back if you haven't already gotten comments. Also, to underscore this idea, if there's like grammar stuff, I'm trying not to like cover your page in red marking. Like if I'm seeing, you've got comma splices and there's like 5 or 6 comma splices, I'm probably just going to mention it once and be like, you need to look at comma splices. And so it's like kind of the onus is on you to revise your draft and to proofread it and to understand like what the rules are. And I'll point them out as best as I can, but I can't point out every instance of every error. Also, while I'm thinking about it, and while we're on the idea of doing revisions, and if you do want somebody to spend, a lot more time, if you're worried about your ability to like use some grammar rules, or if you're worried about like, are my paragraphs really cohesive, and you just want an extra pair of eyes to like hone in on some things and go over things with you, you can use this online tutoring tab over here, and that'll take you to the online tutoring form where you can upload your paper. And I think there's, whenever I did this briefly with ACC, there was 2 kind of ways of doing tutoring, and that's kind of how it's set up with the company I do my tutoring with. You can use, there's usually an option to do things live or asynchronous. We might be totally asynchronous. If it's asynchronous, you just upload your paper, you answer some questions about it, and then like within 24 or 48 hours or however long it is, somebody will like give you your paper back with comments on it, right? I don't know how invasive the comments are going to be. If there's an option to do lives, then you'll work with somebody on a one-on-one, and there'll be, generally the way that we do it is there's a time limit on stuff. I am not totally sure if we're doing lives and asyncs, but there's a short video here about how to schedule a session, and all you got to do is you log in and it'll give you some instructions, and that's the way to get like some more hands-on invasive time with somebody going over your paper like that. I used to work in the learning lab at Hayes for a while, and like that's what we would do there. If you're close to a physical campus and you want to like bring your paper in and have somebody, if you want to sit next to somebody and they'll literally like go over and read your paper with you, that's also really beneficial. It just helps to have somebody who has this like unused knowledge of comma rules in front of you. It's really beneficial. So if that's something you want to do, just know that there are online resources available, and there's in-person resources too. Also, I added some elements to the rubrics based on some stuff that I was seeing in the proposals that I realized I wasn't totally clear about. So if you go to the, like, say, the rhetorical analysis module, one of the things you'll see on the rhetorical analysis assignment is under essential elements, you'll see use proper academic formatting, such as easily readable font. I haven't really had any problems with like font choice or font size. But the things that I am noticing that are missing pretty consistently in the proposals, a heading, a title, double line spacing, stuff like that, that I realized when I went back and I looked at my proposal, I just said adheres to MLA standards. And I was like, well, that's not actually so clear that those are part of MLA standards. So I just wanted to go through and I added these to all my rubrics. So there shouldn't be any confusion about that now. If I saw it in your, I might have left some comments about it, like, hey, don't forget to do double line spacing. Like maybe I left that in your feedback for your formatting notes or something like that. It wasn't something that I like took off a whole bunch of points for. Like I didn't fail anybody's paper because it wasn't double line spaced. Like if I took off points for stuff, it was more substantive. It was more like, I found your reasoning hard to follow. One of the things I noticed in the proposals a lot was, well, maybe not a lot, but like occasionally the entire second section would just be missing. there wouldn't be a paragraph dedicated to research methods and sources. There would be a paragraph dedicated to like almost just trying to write a draft of your argument already or something like that. So like doing something that I didn't totally ask for in the prompt, or something's like glaringly missing from the prompt. That might be where you lost some points. So if you have any questions on why you got the specific score you did, or what you could do to improve the score on revision, don't hesitate to email me. We can talk about your paper more in depth there. Otherwise, I do have a couple more things to talk about before we launch into content today. If you go to the rhetorical analysis module, you will see that in addition to the analysis to the appeal of emotion, which don't forget is due tomorrow night, the analysis of the appeal to credibility is now live. And this will be due on the 15th. So you got a couple of weeks to work on this one, same thing as you got with the last one. And it'll be the same thing. You'll turn it in and you'll have a week from when I've returned that scored assignment back to you to revise it. And it's going to be over a different one. This one's going to be over Jonathan Garlick's To Seek Common Ground on Life's Big Questions. We need science literacy. This is in the conversation. There's some important ethos information over here about who Jonathan Garlick is. And we'll talk about this a little bit today. You know, last time I sort of led you to doubt all links because Bernie Sanders' links didn't appear to be actually inserted by Bernie Sanders himself. It's kind of like you kind of got to take a website on a case-by-case basis and make a judgment call. It's like, does it seem like it's the editorial practice of this website to the writer to include these links? You can talk about these links as a part of like the ethos, like are these sources like credible and are they easy to get to? What do they add to the argument? That can be something you talk about, but just know that, you know, sometimes it's pretty glaringly obvious that they weren't put there by the author. Sometimes, like in the case of our daylight savings argument from Popular Mechanics, it does seem like this guy wrote this article with the idea that he was putting links in, because there are some signal phrases that indicate that he wrote this content designed around linking. Like he writes this National Institutes of Health overview, right? That's a self-referential sentence that's clearly designed to have a hyperlink like embedded in it, right? So it gets kind of confusing, right? You know, Aristotle was writing before a time of hyperlinks. So the ideas of credibility have evolved over the years, and, you know, academic writing and analysis of academic arguments haven't always totally caught up. So, you know, the hyperlinks are kind of a thing. Like they're part of the ethos for sure, but sometimes they're not actually part of the author's words, if that makes any sense. But that is now available, and you're going to be doing a very similar thing that you did for the appeal to emotion. You're going to give me a summary of the argument and the article. This part of the assignment is basically the exact same, only in the analysis paragraph, now you're looking at credibility building stuff, and you'll be answering questions and giving me examples of his language that add to his credibility, or show him establishing credibility, or show him not establishing credibility, or, you know, criticizing his credibility, right? It's not with any of these individual appeals, it's not kind of all or nothing, right? Just because an author, you know, might have some question marks about their credibility, you know, maybe there are more benefits than detriments in their credibility, right? So it's all about, like, you know, does the good outweigh the bad in each of these, right? Do they overcome some of their deficiencies in order to persuade you about some stuff, right? And I think that, you know, as we go through the semester, you'll kind of see as we read these paired arguments, you know, it's often really difficult to just come to a conclusion about what you feel about the argument. what, not just what you feel about the argument, but, like, you know, assessing the actual logic of the argument itself. It's like, well, is this actually compelling? Are these premises actually true? Is it even possible to determine it without leaving this article and going and finding more confirming information? So that's, like, you know, it's a tightrope. For sure. But this assignment is available now for your reading and responding pleasure. And that is about all that I have to say about that, except for a couple brief notes about your ongoing research module. Your annotated bibliography, don't forget, is going to be due next week. You should have a pretty good sense. As I was going through the proposals, I'm mostly seeing like good sources. I haven't run across any source that I'm just like, this is crazy, bananas. How did you get there? So the quality of the sources is really good, and I'm really pleased with that. So, and it seems like everyone has at least 2 sources that they could talk about, which is really good too. Some people have more for sure. And most of my comments about sources so far on the proposals have been, you know, your MLA format isn't correct, right? Which is just a matter of like, I've tried to insert some helpful links where I can in your proposal to like, you know, go to the Purdue OWL for this or that. Definitely look at as many models as you can and try to reason your way through stuff. Some stuff is difficult to nail down. If you're citing government documents, if you're citing like a 72-page, somebody, I think it's Michael, is the Artemis project itself is a 72-page PDF published by NASA just floating around on the internet. It's kind of a tough one to cite. So I give you a link to a resource that I think will help you there. I don't do a lot. MLA is not really, there's a way to do it for government documents, but it's designed to cite literature. And so it's like, it's flexible to a point, but it's, you know, there's like specific citation styles for legal studies that are designed to cite like laws and documents and stuff like that just kind of handle that stuff better. Again, you can do it in MLA, but it's like you kind of have to look for models of stuff like that. So definitely take a look at the annotated bibliography. I will pause over a couple of these because these are all available. You should at least have familiarized yourself a little bit with the research draft assignment rubric itself. It's pretty straightforward. It's just eventually you're going to be producing this 1,000-word research paper. You know, I introduced the 5-paragraph essay in those notes that we went over about common essay conventions, the same notes that have like using and incorporating sources, the notes about introductions and conclusions. And I'm kind of just looking for a 5-paragraph essay here. You can innovate on that basic structure as you see fit. But if you give me, you know, an introduction that ends with your thesis statement and then 3 body paragraphs, each explaining or focusing on one reason that supports your thesis statement and a conclusion, that's the structure I'm really looking for out of your paper. Oh, nice. That's really cool. Yeah, I bet they, I don't know what citation style they might use. She might use some version of Chicago, but I think like there's like a specific legal citation style. I sometimes as a tutor, I get a lot of international customers. It's really interesting. I get a lot of Australians. Don't know why, but I got somebody that was writing like I don't even know what it was. It was like a case history or like an overview of something, some kind of legal case. And they were using a citation style that I'd never heard of. And when I searched for it, it is a 500-page book on how, it's a PDF just like on the internet. And it might be APA. So Mike is in the chat. It was a citation style I'd never heard of. It was a whole manual on just how to cite legal cases in Australia. So, you know, there's a whole bunch of different like things that have their own nuances. But in terms of what we're doing here with the research paper, right? I'm just looking for basically a 5-paragraph essay. And, you know, if you follow the instructions of this rubric right here and, you know, examine how all of these explain what I'm looking for, you'll see that I'm basically describing a 5-paragraph essay here. You know, if you want to branch out, you want to include a paragraph that considers counter arguments. If you have more than 3 reasons that you're explaining, if you have a paragraph that you want to dedicate to background information that you feel like you need to elaborate on something, you know, more detail than your introduction goes into, you know, you can add on to it, right? Essays are modular. You can add as many that you want to, but you know, if you turn in like a paper that has like one giant block of text that has no indentation and it's single line space, maybe you are not paying very close attention to structure. Maybe you should go back and look at some of the structural items. And then the presentation, I want to talk about this a little bit just because I haven't. I've alluded to it many times. What I'm looking for is you can do this as a Google Slides or a PowerPoint presentation. I'm sure that there are other presentation formats that you could use. I know that Blackboard accepts slides and PowerPoint. I don't think it accepts anything else. Unless like you want to build it in a different application and then save that as a PDF. Like I know a lot of my notes, I build them as PowerPoints and I save them as PDFs. You know, as long as Blackboard accepts it, then I'll accept it, right? But, you know, PowerPoint is pretty overpowering. It might be a little bit too centrally overpowering for some. Google Slides is pretty basic. You know, if you've never worked with presentation software before, Google Slides might be the way to go. If you're working with Apple, you know, don't. Or like turn it into a PDF is all I have to say there. It's going to be the same problem that you're going to run into with a Pages file. It's just not, Blackboard's not going to read it. And if Blackboard can't read it, I can't read it. But what I'm basically looking for you to do is create a short presentation based on your draft. And you won't worry about drawing lots or anything. I'm just going to assign everybody a slot in alphabetical order. So it's alphabetical order, it is again. If you're in the middle of the alphabet, I was M when I was in school, so I was always good. I always had a few days before my presentation came around. But in order to offset that, all your presentations are due on the same day. So you actually don't have a few extra days. You just put off the shame of being in front of everybody. But what you're going to do is you're going to take my position. I will turn over the camera to you for at least 5 minutes. You know, you can go over, but we don't want to go over too much. I'm going to probably end up actually going back in and putting a cap on, like, let's say like 5 to 7 minutes. We don't want to take more than 10 total minutes. I'd actually decrease that and say 3 to 5 minutes. You'll find that it's surprisingly difficult to fill 3 minutes of talking. But it doesn't have to be a particularly long PowerPoint. I'm looking for 4 to 6 slides total. You know, I'm not looking for you to copy and paste whole blocks of your text into the PowerPoint. You know, my PowerPoints are kind of a model here. Like, there's some PowerPoints I have that clearly have too much content on them, and I'm aware of that. But you want your PowerPoints to just give yourself bullets and broad strokes, so that it gives you something that you can talk about, right? You might have a draft of your draft open so that you can talk about it in more detail. But pull a quote out, put it in your slide, find some way in order to like sort of visually represent what I'm talking about. You can use media, you can use, I guess if you find a video, a very short video that somehow explains or illustrates one part of your point, or if part of your evidence is contained in a video, some of you might be using TED Talks or other kind of YouTube media, you can incorporate that too. I'm noticing all sorts of spelling errors. I spelled compelling wrong. I spelled it camelling. Oh, that's embarrassing. But the presentation it's a pretty informal kind of thing. I'm just looking for you to sort of, talk to me and the class about, what was your research project? What was your thesis statement? What kind of evidence did you find? What kind of argument did you make? And then, in the course of your presentation, I'll try to ask you, a question or two that I might have about something that maybe you didn't think about or didn't bring up, or maybe I want elaboration on a certain point, right? It's not like a too in-depth Q&A session, but we'll be setting aside the last 3 class periods to do presentations. And hopefully there will be a little bit of space on that last day. Inevitably, people will drop the class, people will not have presentations. It might go faster or slower. Usually it tends to go slower up front and faster on the second day. So we'll sort of see how that plays out. But this is going to be due on the 28th at noon, which is going to be the day before the first presentations go live. There was a microphone question, perhaps?
I have a question. So when it comes to revision, like for any of the things, you said you can revise within a week, right?
Correct.
And did you ever show exactly how to do that?
Well, we went through and did the paramedic method in that one example. And, that's the paramedic method is good if you have like sentences that aren't clear and you're trying to say something a little bit more clearly. There's some people that I'm leaving notes on their drafts, like, this is unfocused. Like, it leaves me with questions. Are you doing this or that? So that's like in your revision, I would want like clarity, like pick something, or like maybe neither of those things are what you actually meant. Like getting more to a focused sense of like, okay, well, he didn't understand what I meant by that. So I need to change this content to more clearly and directly express what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but like, how is there a button you press on the thing that I'm missing? Because I looked to see.
You mean like actually submitting the document?
Yeah, like,
okay.
Is there some way, like when you mean revision, what exactly? Is there a button that you press that allows you to be able to do that? Is there...
Oh, you mean, okay. So what I'm looking for is, look at any comments that I left on the digital version of the draft, look at any feedback, take that to your document and apply that to your document, and then re-upload a new document.
Oh, okay.
Yes, right. That's cool. The run. And actually, somebody had mentioned, I can't remember who it was now, whether or not I wanted people to highlight the things that they changed, which I always think is a great idea, and I always forget to put it in my rubrics. Thank you, Kylie. It's not in there, but it's not in my rubric, but that would be useful. Like I pull them up side by side, and I can sort of gauge as I'm reading it, like, oh, is this clearly different than this? But if you want to otherwise bold anything, or use the highlight function in Word or something that would otherwise indicate that this is different content, then yeah, that'd be fine too. Are we able to redo our last assignment? So you're able to redo any assignment that has this section on it that says revision of this assignment. And what that means is basically any of the research paper stuff and any of the rhetorical analysis stuff. Those are the ones that are the revision ones. The discussion threads are kind of one and done. You either get them or you don't. And most of those, I'm not going to say that they're exactly completion grades, because I am scoring them with some nuance. If you don't, some of the ones that lost points in the fallacies were ones that I could not anywhere in your response see the name of a fallacy. If you talked around it and didn't give me any sort of indication this is the fallacy that I'm talking about, then I probably took off some points for that, because one of the essential elements for that assignment was to name the specific fallacy, right? It didn't happen too often, but it happened a couple of times. Some people wrote about things that were not fallacies, which I would also like to talk about in just a minute. Which I think in some ways were productive misunderstandings, two very specific misunderstandings that I do want to talk about. Do we have to revise if somehow we got a worse grade than the first? Would you keep the original? I will take the higher of whichever it is, right? I'm not ever going to give you a lower grade on revision. That would be cruel and unusual, and the Constitution forbids it. But to your other question, Deborah, how do you cite things verbally in MLA style? You're not really citing anything in MLA style. You're just going to kind of tell me about your paper, right? If you want to cite verbally, you would say, according to Dr. Crazy Nonsense, right? According to Professor Morgan, reptile aliens are actually quite nice, right? Or whatever like that. That's the way you would sort of do verbal citation. Great. Any other questions? Everybody clear on what's going on? Don't ever think that, I'm going to interrupt immediately. Don't ever think that you're bothering me by asking questions. I ask more questions. Critically minded people ask questions. Don't ever feel ashamed that you don't understand something. If you feel ashamed in the session and you're like, I don't want to speak up, email me the question. I'm never going to email you back, you moron. How dare you use the English language at me? I'm never going to do that. Ask questions. It's the only way that you're ever going to get clarity.
I have a question on the research proposal. What am I trying to ask? Do we wait for you to let us know that it needs to be revised, or can we revise it if we feel like it needs revision?
Wait until I give you the feedback, and then that'll start the clock on your revision. Because you might have things that you're like, oh, I wanted to do that differently. Just put a pin in that, put that on your crazy vision board of red string that is your research paper right now. And just whenever I get the score back to you, go ahead, do whatever you wanted to do, and then, maybe synthesize that with the feedback I gave you. And that's why I'm trying to get through them like as quick as I can. But
okay, yeah, no, it's just, I only ask because some of our full-time jobber people
sure.
I just want to make sure, I have enough time, to get the things I need to get done so that I'm not like lagging behind, but cool. Thank you.
I totally understand. I empathize with the multiple job people. I have 3 jobs. So it's brutal out here. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
I have one more question. So when it comes to like the revision, like depending like what score you got, no matter what score you got, can you still revise it and get a better grade even if you didn't fail?
Theoretically, yes. But if you got like a 49 out of 50, it might take me a while to get to your revision because I will do some triage and prioritize the students because one of the provisions of revision, that rhymes, it's nice. One of the provisions of revision is that if you score less than a 35, then I want you to revise. Again, I can't come to your house and like call the revision police on you and make you revise it, but you should be revising it if you got under that, because that means you're not passing the assignments, and these are heavy assignments, which is likely to mean you're not going to pass the class. Those are the students that I'd like to prioritize in the revision triage. So, if you got a 99 in the class and you have one comma splice that's just keeping you awake at night and you had to revise that and fix it, I'll get to it. But it's less important in the scheme of things. But I will never tell you not to revise, if that makes sense. Like, you can always revise it and try to get a better score on something. Is 42 out of 50 good, or would you prefer revision? What percentage is 42 of 50? I don't know. I'm not a math person.
I think it's an 85.
If you're comfortable with an 85, then yes. At that point, right, as long as you're making the minimum grade to get in this class, I'm a pragmatist about this, honestly. The minimum grade to use this class as a prerequisite is a 70. If you are comfortable with your grade and you are making the minimum grade to beneficially use this class in the future, and you're okay with whatever it does to your GPA, I can't literally force you to do anything. I would suggest, if you want to become a better writer, it's always a good idea to revise. And that's where I'll leave you with that. But again, I can't call the Texas Court of Civil Appeals and be like, I need warrants for revision for the following students, right? Like, I can't. I can tell you that I want you to do it. I can tell you that it's a requirement to do it, but I can't be the one that makes you come out there and do that. So if you feel that a 42 out of 50 is good in your opinion, and then yeah, that is good. So. And also know that the assignments have different percentage weights, right? Some of you will notice that getting a lower grade on this proposal, if you've turned everything in, it didn't particularly hit your overall course average. That's going to get higher, right? You do badly, an 82 on the research paper might hit a little bit differently than an 82 on the research proposal, right? Because the research paper is worth 200 points. So that's like a 20% hit itself, right? It's a very heavy assignment. Whereas the research paper is only worth 50. It's worth, 5% of your total grade. So you could have gotten a 0 on the research proposal, and you can still theoretically get an A in the class. It's probably not very likely, but mathematically it's possible. Just based on the behavior of people that don't turn in assignments, it's probably not very likely. But it's an inductive argument, right? And what do we know about inductive arguments? Is they could always be possibly false. Anyhow, good questions. On that note, let's talk about fallacies. I want to talk about let's see, where is it? I have fallacies of the day. Before I talk about fallacies of the day, there were two productive misunderstandings that I want to talk about. And one of them was, Rachel, if you're here, I want to talk about how you lie to your children, which is a fun story about your child, Matthew, wanted to go to the pool. You wanted him to do what you wanted. So you said, I will bring you to the pool later, knowing full well that you would not. That's a falsehood, right? That's a statement that is false. The pool is closed. Therefore, it is impossible for you to bring him back to the pool unless you broke into the pool, at which point now you're not just a liar, you're a criminal, right? Which is my favorite parent. And while it is a noble thing to lie to your children, to give them a clear understanding of the stakes of this world, a falsehood is not a fallacy, right? If you would have used the appeal to force to get what you wanted, that would have been a fallacy. If you would have said, you better get in the car or else there will be consequences, right? That's scare tactics, right? That's the appeal to force. That's the argument ad baculum. You will accept this argument or things will happen. You'll be grounded, or, I'll fill all the pools in the neighborhood with cement, which might also be a lie. But right, just because something is false doesn't mean it's fallacious, right? A fallacious line of reasoning could be composed of entirely true statements. It might be absolutely correct that there are consequences, but the upshot of the fallacy is that you're not providing reasons for why the person needs to rationally accept your opinion, right? You're saying it's kind of the classic, the other parental arguments, the circular reasoning / appeal to authority that is, do it because I said so, right? There's not a reason being offered for, you have to think about rhetoric, or you have to think about fallacies. It makes you think about argument in terms of at least a two-way dialogue. There's a person making a claim and an argument, and there's a person responding to that claim, right? And so like you have somebody, you want to do something. You want Matthew, you want to get him in the car, you want to get him out of the pool, right? Well, Matthew's a kid, he's irrational, he's not going to respond to reasoning. So why would I offer him reasons, right? He'll just reject my reasons. So I'm in control, so I can just lie to him, right? But the idea is that, I'm not using reasoning in order to change someone's mind about something. I'm using something other than reasoning to change your mind. And in this case, it's using the emotional pleasure of, you can do the thing later, right? It's not necessarily fallacious as much as it's just like including a falsehood in your, there's no way around it. It's just lying to them, which is not necessarily fallacious. It's just lying, right? Again, no judgment here. I have a long and storied history of lying to children. It's one of my favorite things to do. So the other one was Misty wanted to talk about how the American dream is a fallacy. And I found this one really interesting because there was kind of three ideas going on here. On the one hand, Misty, you claim that the American dream is a sham, which brings us right back to where we started with lying to children, which is, you're just claiming that the statement, the American dream is true, or the American dream is real, is false, right? Which is just saying that that's a false statement, right? That's not saying that it's a fallacy as much as it's saying it's not true. Well, so what I was kind of getting at with that, because you had linked to this article about the fallacy of the American dream. And the problem I have with the article is the author never really stated what fallacy they thought the American dream was. Like, on the one hand, if you can say the American dream is a story. It's a story that we tell to people, like Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or, anything else that's like somewhat legendary and mythological, right? In that sense, it's not necessarily a fallacy as much as it's, it might be the way that you're framing the story is appealing to someone's, appealing to tradition in some way. If you're saying, that somehow to achieve the American dream is somehow related to the way that we've always done things. It really matters. The example that I left in the notes was like, if I used if I use the conditional statement, if you work hard, then you can achieve the American dream in service of a fallacious conclusion, right? And the example that I used was, if I work hard, then I can achieve the American dream, right? Premise one, right? That's not an argument, right? That is, hard. Words are hard. If I work hard, I have to work twice as hard, work squared. But if he's like, it's too many works, too much work there. Right, on its own, this isn't an argument, right? This is a conditional statement. If, then, right? It can be a premise to an argument that contains a fallacy, right? If I threw in a non sequitur like Professor Morgan is a reptile alien, right? Therefore, Professor Morgan probably won't achieve the American dream. Now it's a fallacy, right? And it's a fallacy because that second premise that is, whether or not I'm a reptile alien doesn't have any bearing on how hard I work and whether or not achieving something called the American dream is dependent on hard work, right? You can throw anything in here, right? Professor Morgan is an immigrant. Professor Morgan is lazy. Professor Morgan is a libertarian. It doesn't really, you can put anything in there, right? And the point of the fallacy is that the terms of an argument don't match up. So I hope that makes it a little bit clearer what I was looking for there. But again, I thought both of those are really productive misinterpretations because it is unclear sometimes, like what exactly the difference between something that's just merely untrue or what I think is, the premise to what is otherwise a possibly fallacious or just a weak argument, which would just be what this conditional statement could be on its own. Unless you're providing me with some like a premise that demonstrates the idea that hard work relates directly to achieving the American dream every time, then we're going to have to either introduce a lot of nuance or we're going to redefine what the American dream is, or we're going to have to redefine what hard work is. Like all of these things deserve a little bit of attention and, elaboration, right? So hopefully that clarifies a few things there. And I do want to shout out to Katie, fallacies of the day, Katie's strawman argument, PETA smoking baby. PETA smoking baby was fun. You wouldn't let your child smoke. Like smoking, eating meat causes heart disease and cancer. Katie says that this is the strawman fallacy because it's misrepresenting the dangers of meat and its relationship to carcinogens, which I think is a very novel interpretation of that. This is actually probably a better example of a fallacy we're not even going to talk about, which is called literally the fallacy of the weak analogy. It's just, it's weak tea analogy. That's just not an appropriate comparison to make between these two things. It's the apples and oranges kind of thing. But I love this kid with the cigar. That's one of my favorite things I looked at today. PETA, the PETA itself loves this. They think it's great. Go vegan. I mean, you can make an argument for being vegan without including this. That's ridiculous. Karen, the appeal to snobbery and celebrity of the L'Oreal Advanced Hair Care Thickening Shampoo. Blake Lively from L'Oreal Paris, right? Also, you mentioned the appeal to celebrity, which is really a little bit more of like the appeal to false authority. It's a little blurs the line between it because it's like, don't you want to be dazzling like this famous person that right? And it doesn't matter what Blake Lively, what they do. It's not related to producing shampoo, right? Blake Lively didn't sit in the lab with beakers and stuff, conducting double-blind experiments about shampoo thickening statistics. The science, using science in the service of fallacy is one of my favorite things about advertising. But she says something at the very end. The appeal to snobbery. You're worth it, right? You're worth, you know what? I am worth it. I deserve this hair. I deserve the hair that's twice as thick as normal, right? I need more volume. Which is, Deborah, kind of exactly what your moisturizing cream one was, right? The idea that, what was it? Creme de la Mer cost $545. And it was these moving scenes of like beautiful white people rubbing their skin. It's disgusting, right? I also want to shout out to Rebecca, the appeal to pity, save the children. This is a really cool one. And since we don't have sound, I'm not going to subject you to watching it, but it's not too long. It's about a minute long, but it's a textbook appeal to pity, right? It's really selling. It might be a noble idea, but it's just telling you a bunch of stories. It's a bunch of storytelling, right? It's very creative storytelling. It's very bad logic. And I thought it was a very well described fallacious appeal in the appeal to pity for saving the children. Who doesn't want to save the children? And one of my favorites, this one, talking about people zigging instead of zagging, Brianna's appeal to the stick, which, oh, it's very loud. This was an anti-AIDS, or it's kind of weird to say anti-AIDS commercial, but it was a campaign against like AIDS. And it's this very menacing British guy. This is an English campaign. He's like chiseling the word AIDS, and it gets knocked down. And this is very early in the AIDS epidemic. AIDS, don't die of ignorance. Okay, a little heavy-handed. And then to put a nice icing on the cake, let's throw in some white roses. There we go. Cue the roses. I don't know if those are roses. Those might be orderly endings.
Those are lilies.
Lilies. Okay. So yeah, issued by the health departments of the United Kingdom. This one was pretty bold, right? Don't have sex or else, or like it's just the way that it's very much like I'm going to scare you into like being informed. It's weird. It's using the appeal to the stick in service of like motivating you to learn, but that's like just learning should be good in and of itself. Like,
I think lilies actually signify something. The white lilies, they signify like either virginity or innocence or something like that.
Oh, that wouldn't surprise me at all, actually. Yeah. That would be a really powerful, because white also has like all those kinds of purity symbolisms, right, that get like used and manipulated all over the place. So yeah, that's a really good catch too. The symbolism that would be like noticeable across cultures too. Purity culture. So those are some of my favorites. Some honorable mentions: Socorro's appeal to vanity and the Colgate commercial. Carrie's appeal to the people with the Chantrix. The Chantrix commercial was so ridiculous. It's like this soothing music of this guy like reading a book talking about how he quit cigarettes over this laundry list of horrible side effects of Chantrix. Definitely being like a version of the appeal to the people. And then Deborah, your appeal to snobbery and vanity. Kat, your appeal to the people with the Axe and Tag body spray. That was a really good one. Even you, Milk a Toast white kid in high school, if you use this Axe body spray, the whole cheerleading squad will apparently suffocate you to death. I don't know exactly what they were going for there. But these are all great. These are all good examples. And it's also examples of how the dynamism of both rhetoric and argument and fallacies, how there's like a dialogue going on, and there's propositions being offered and premises being offered that are like accepted and rejected. Images, especially in advertising, images that are just sort of put alongside of each other to send powerful messages, right? Good. On that note, let's take a little dive into today's fallacies. Fallacies of weak induction for the next 15-ish minutes. We might go a little bit long on these. We might go 20 and then take our break at 7:05, just because I wanted to talk about those assignments earlier today. The premise of the fallacious arguments described in the preceding section, and by preceding here, they mean like literally the notes we just looked at, because I just keep cribbing content from this logic textbook, are not relevant to the conclusions drawn. However, there are many fallacious arguments in which the premise are relevant and yet are wholly inadequate. And these are what we call fallacies of defective induction. What are asserted as premises simply do not serve as good reasons to reach the drawn conclusion or conclusion drawn. The first of these is the argument from ignorance. A fallacy that the idea that just because something has not been proved true or disconfirmed as false, that we can say anything definite about it, right? It's of the form, I don't know anything about this, therefore I have drawn a definite conclusion about it, right? I don't know if Professor Morgan is a reptile alien, therefore he isn't, right? Well, we don't know that, right? Just because you haven't proved that I am doesn't mean that I'm not. It just means that you haven't proved that yet, for whatever reasons. Just because some proposition has not yet been proved false, we are not entitled to conclude that it is true. At some point, the same point can be made in reverse. If some proposition has not yet been proved true, we're not entitled to conclude that it is false. The fact that we cannot now be confident rarely serves as good reason to assert knowledge of falsity or truth, right? Maybe there are variables that we're not considering now that in the future will take this state of ignorance that we are in and produce evidence towards some definite conclusion, right? But just because we're uncertain doesn't mean we can't draw any conclusions, which is kind of what our one of our daylight savings arguments is making, which is right down here. Aha. Originally, daylight savings time was thought to be a major driver of energy savings. With more sunlight, people could rely on sun for light and heat instead of burning wood and candles. Cheaper and better for the environment. In recent years, these claims have come under fire, but here's the thing. Anyone who tells you anything unambiguous about the effects of daylight savings on energy use is lying. Research is hard to conduct simply because daylight savings has been in effect for so long, and it's hard to accurately measure what energy we use would be like without it. And energy use varies so widely in this country based on location and economics that it's basically impossible to get an overall rigorous look. So what this author, what Nosowitz is charging about drawing any conclusions at all about whether or not it is true or false that daylight savings has any relation to energy savings is that we don't know, right? Some studies say that it does save energy. Some studies say that it doesn't. So we're right now suspended in a state of advanced ignorance. From this ignorance, we cannot conclude that it either does or does not actually produce any energy savings, right? That's his claim. He's claiming that people that are drawing definite conclusions from the ambiguity are not being forthcoming with you, which quite frankly is exactly what these guys are doing. They're drawing definite conclusions and they're saying energy use, daylight savings time does not save energy. Like they are just saying that flat out, right? Whether or not either of those people or have a point about any of that is another matter. But this is what the ignorance fallacy looks like out in the wild, is somebody saying that, look, there's not clear guidance one way or the other on an issue. Therefore, anybody drawing definite conclusions about this topic is not acting correctly. Like you can't draw these. That's the ignorance fallacy. Right? There's no evidence that Professor Morgan is a reptile alien, therefore he is not a reptile alien. Right? There's no evidence that this is like all the time with the building of like great ancient monuments. Like we sometimes are like, oh, how did ancient people build these things? It must have been aliens, right? And that's the next logical step for some people, especially this guy. I don't remember his name, but he's a popular meme of aliens. So the upshot of the ignorance fallacy: from not knowing anything, you draw definite conclusions. That is really the rub of the daylight savings argument. When we get right down to it, it's kind of like, are you a pragmatist and you don't really care about daylight versus nighttime, or do you just I like daylight? That's kind of like what the argument kind of turns on. The appealed authority, a fallacy in which a conclusion is accepted as true simply because an expert has said it is true. It's predicated on the feeling of respect that people have for the famous. This is a fallacy this is like an ethos fallacy, right? Instead of building ethos, you're using ethos fallaciously, or using somebody's credibility fallaciously. Well, Neil deGrasse Tyson said it, so therefore it's got to be true. Well, what did he say? Usually he's not being fallacious about stuff, but he can be glib. He can be, even Neil deGrasse Tyson isn't right about everything. And this is where we get to my favorite cigarette ads, right? Which I saw somebody, I think it might have been Mike or Patrick, talked about the Camel. I saw the Camel T-zone pop up again. I was real pleased to see that. Not necessarily a relevance fallacy, more of a fallacy of weak induction. But I was happy to see the T-zone once again. For here, I've got noted ufologist, or ufologist is how we like to pronounce it. Noted ufologist Tom DeLonge. Oh, Red Bull, right. We'll come back to Red Bull. Noted ufologist Tom DeLonge, formerly of the pop punk band Blink-182, said Professor Morgan is a reptile alien, therefore he must be a reptile alien. Here's an example fallacy that needs a little bit of context if you don't know what Blink-182 was, which was a very famous band for a while. And one of the members, Tom DeLonge, apparently always into UFOs and stuff like that. Now he's like a UFO researcher, whatever that means. And he runs with the MUFON people. He's founded a creative company called To the Stars or something like that. They're heavily in debt. They're not doing well, but he likes aliens, or he likes pretend aliens, or he pretends to like real aliens. I don't know what it is. But just because some expert in a field is saying something is true isn't any reason to just take that claim on the face of it, right? It's what are the words that they're saying? What is the claim that they're making? How can we evaluate it, right? Just because a doctor smokes cigarettes doesn't mean that it's okay for you to smoke cigarettes, right? You would be hard pressed to find some doctors nowadays that are smoking cigarettes, especially in his office. That's where he's at. It's pretty wild. If I walked in and the doctor was smoking, I would immediately walk back out, right? It might be the tu quoque fallacy, but I'm like, no. I'm just not going to be served by a doctor. He could be a very fine surgeon, but there was that one doctor who she was with doctors, like Frontier Doctors or whatever. She was the one that was talking about how abortion is really a demon possession problem. She was a pediatrician. She was getting a lot of traction talking about COVID. She went on a whole circuit. She was on Alex Jones a couple of times. But she's a pediatrician. She's a real pediatrician. She's a doctor. But she also thinks that, some pregnancies are caused by, demon possession in the night, in your dreams. So, maybe don't just take that for the face of it just because she's a doctor, right? Hey, doctors can be idiots too. This is America. You can be anything you want. The false cause fallacy. There's two big versions of the false cause fallacy. Fallacy in which something that is not really the cause of something else is treated as its cause. One of these is post hoc ergo propter hoc, which is a fancy Latin way of saying after this, therefore because of this. Right? It's the correlation doesn't equal causation fallacy. Just because two things happened in close proximity in time, you can't attribute one as causing the other. Right? There might be other circumstances that are accounting for that. We've kind of talked about this one before too. The slippery slope fallacy, in which somebody argues that the change in a particular direction is asserted to lead inevitably to usually terrible and undesirable conclusions. Right? Today's false step is tomorrow's inevitable apocalypse, right? This is also features prominently on the Alex Jones show, right? Today you're voting for Democrats. Tomorrow it's globalist demons running the world, right? It's highly unlikely. Presuming the reality of a causal connection that does not exist and is a common mistake. We sometimes mistakenly presume that one event is caused by another simply because it follows closely in time. It's also false cause is also the fallacy committed when one mistakenly argues against some proposal on the ground that any change in a given direction is sure to lead to other changes in the future. If we let Professor Morgan teach us about common usage today, soon enough we'll be submitting to reptile alien grammar, right? Highly unlikely. Although I would be interested in what reptile alien grammar was, I would not push alien grammar on you. I'm not alien grammar pusher, okay? It's hard enough to get you to learn human common usage, much less alien common usage. But then over here in this image on the right, this is an example of post hoc ergo propter hoc, right? Ice cream sales versus shark attacks seems like they're very closely coordinated. Maybe you could argue that ice cream sales are causing shark attacks. What other factor would account for ice cream sales peaking and shark attacks peaking in the same months between June and July? Anyone or Deborah?
It's summer, so everyone's at the beach.
It's summer. More people likely to eat ice cream. More people likely to swim. The more people that are in the water, the higher probability it is to get attacked by a shark. Really hard to get attacked by the shark in my apartment, unless it's a land shark, which you can never account for the land shark. The mythical creature, not the beer. The beer is garbage. I will never get bit by an actual, like a land shark beer in my apartment. They're disgusting. Jimmy Buffett can go learn a reptile alien combo. The hasty generalization, a fallacy of defective induction in which one moves carelessly from a single case or very few cases to a large-scale generalization about most cases, known as converse accident. This is related to a fallacy we'll talk about next time called accident, which is the misapplication of a rule to a specific case. They're opposites of each other. One is reasoning from the particular to the general. The other is reasoning from the general to a particular. So if you look at some examples of this, Professor Morgan is a reptile alien, therefore all English professors must be reptile aliens, right? Just because I'm a reptile alien, it doesn't mean that every English professor is a reptile alien. But I like this Colgate one in particular because 9 out of 10 dentists who tried would recommend it. Anybody see the problem with the way that this statistic is constructed?
Yeah, the data is reduced. Like, try it.
What if only 10 dentists tried it out of all the dentists, right? Who tried is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that statistic. The wording of that is hilarious to me. 9 out of 10 dentists who tried it. Why not? That's like saying something about your data. 90% of the dentists you surveyed tried it. Your survey size is probably incredibly small. And on that note, not too many fallacies of weak induction, but that brings us to the end of our first hour. We got it. We got all the things. I love it when a good plan comes together. So we'll reconvene here. Let's take 10. We'll come back at 7:10. And we will talk about, we'll elaborate more on, we'll pick up where we left off with the rhetorical analysis stuff. We'll keep talking about ethos to what extent we didn't get to that last time. And then we'll talk about pathos and logos. We'll keep looking at, I'll keep using Bernie Sanders and Walsh, but we'll also look at those new arguments about daylight savings time. So go ahead and take a break, and I'll see you back in just a minute. Okay, welcome back. So, when we last left our heroic appeals, we were questioning ethos. Gallery up here. And we had left off, we were talking about Bernie Sanders and his argument or we were talking about more of his appeal to ethos more than his actual argument, yet in the Make College Free for All and Jennifer Walsh's argument about why we should abandon or why states should abandon the free college movement. And we were discussing their ethos. And we were finding that they were doing some things well to build ethos, and we were finding that they were doing some things maybe not so well, or they could have done better. In general, I think what we were finding were people having engaged in a rational debate on two sides of an issue that were generally treating that debate seriously and each other with respect. And that's about where we left off. It was complicated, is the last sort of set of ideas that we got to. So we'll come back to ethos. We'll bring up some ethos ideas again when we look at, I'm going to start really talking about pathos though, and talk about the two arguments that we looked at today. But while we're talking about pathos, we'll also talk about some of these. We'll come back to these ethos ideas, I'm sure. We'll probably also rope Bernie and Walsh in to our discussion of pathos as well and build on that. Hopefully we'll get to some kind of discussion of logos today. Although it might not happen. And if that's the case, then we'll just kick logos down the street till next week. But by that time, we'll have a whole boatload of arguments to actually look at the logic of the argument, which is the one thing that we've like really not taken too much time to actually examine, right? And it's actually the shortest part of every argument is just the logic, right? It could be, in Walsh's case, I think you can boil the logic down to like 2 sentences. In Bernie's case, I think it's like more like 7 sentences, maybe 8. But the logic is like the shortest part. The ethos and the logo, or the ethos and the pathos, that's where people spend most of their time actually developing their argument. So pathos, the emotional appeal. Mr. Aristotle says, secondly, persuasion may come through the hearers when our speech stirs their emotions. Our judgments when we are pleased and friendly are not the same as when we are pained and hostile. This is the Snickers satisfies justification of pathos appeal, right? Oh, you're not yourself when you're hungry. Here, have a Snickers. Now evaluate this argument, right? Oh, now that I've eaten this delicious candy bar, all of a sudden I am in the mood to agree with anything. Pathos shares a root with English words like empathy and pathetic and pity. It's the quality of arousing the audience's emotions using evocative, figurative, and descriptive language, narrative, and humor. Academic writing tends to avoid strong appeals to pathos, but arguments in everyday life are ripe with them, appealing to your desires, your beliefs, and your values. And the pathos and ethos kind of overlap with this idea of appealing to your values. There's, on the one hand, appealing to your personal values, and on the other hand, is appealing to like moral character, right? And when you're talking about like moral values like that, you're really more talking about ethos than you are about pathos. But the distinction is kind of blurry and fuzzy. You can kind of talk like walk and chew gum and talk about both of those at the same time. Pathos originally comes out of Greek theater. Aristotle wrote another text called the Poetics. If you ever studied literature, you're bound to run into the Poetics. And that's where we get like pathos. The other big discussion in Aristotle of pathos is in the Poetics, because this is one of the things that like the theater produces in the audience. According to Aristotle, like the point of any drama, his idea of drama is a little bit different, but the point of art and drama is to engender or give rise to catharsis. It's the idea that you watch horrible, terrible, pitiful things happening to somebody else, and it makes you feel better. And you can get rid of those. And for Aristotle, good theater was like, it was like penicillin or Percocet. Like it had a medical purpose. It assuaged you or disabused you of certain emotions. People didn't go to watch Oedipus just because it was fun, although it's not a particularly fun play to watch, unless your thing is just, I like watching guys gouge their eyes out once they found out that they've slept with their mother and their children or their siblings. Also weird. We watch that happen to somebody else and we think, we see the conflict and it provokes an emotional responsiveness. And once we get to the justness of the climax, we have a cathartic release. So thank God thank God it's not that, right? Thank God I'm not that, is I think the thesis of the poetics. Good art should produce the feeling of, oh Jesus, and thankfully it didn't happen to me. So that's like kind of like where this idea is coming from, is that the authors are arousing emotions in you in order to sway you or make you more susceptible to accepting their conclusion, whether or not they have any logic really backing it up, or if the logic is particularly great. And pathos is probably, I don't know if there's any one appeal that's more susceptible to fallacies than the others, but a lot of fallacies have some kind of emotional component to them, swaying your emotions by like appealing to pity or fear, or how you feel about authority figures, or how do you feel about miserable conditions, or your sense of snobbery and vanity, right? A lot of these have like very emotionally specific components to them. So it seems like pathos might be, of all the appeals, the one most susceptible to manipulating you. If there's like this overabundance, if there's too much exaggeration, all of a sudden your argument could tip over into like lots of fallacious kinds of appeals. When evaluating pathos, it's important to understand your emotional connection to the topic and where you and the writer seem to agree or disagree. Your emotional reaction to the language does not necessarily reflect what is true or false. Just because I read something and I think that it's very well written does not mean that it's true. Just because I read something and it appeals to me, generally it appeals to my sensibilities or whatnot, that doesn't mean that it's true. Just because something offends me doesn't mean that it's not true. It's the converse of that. We often, again, disagree about what the content of particular moral virtues are. So, whenever you're heavily emotionally invested in the topic, it might be very difficult for you to disassociate the feeling of pleasure and truth and like the objective fact of truth. That's just kind of the way we are. I don't really have a good explanation for that. Ask a psychologist. The appeal to emotions can be strongly manipulative and subject to fallacies of relevance, like the red herring, the straw man, appeals to popularity, pity, and force, right? Very susceptible to fallacies. So when we're questioning pathos, this is a bunch of questions that ask you about like how the author is using basically narrative to motivate things, or narrative to develop content. If you're reading narrative, then you're probably reading pathos. If somebody's telling you a story, if there's conflict, and conflict, we can take a pretty broad definition of what conflict means. Conflict could just be introducing some kind of tension, right? It doesn't have to be, war and peace, or, catch-22, or, the highly developed narrative conflict like in a novel or something. It doesn't have to be, Tony Stark's character arc of self-sacrifice. Spoiler alert, it's been out for a long time. But it could just be two ideas in tension and talking about how those ideas are in tension, right? We could look at Bernie and his argument. Oh, we could if I had Bernie pulled up. And Bernie tells us a story about the American dream. He says in the 1950s and 60s, it was possible to graduate from high school and move right into a decent paying job with good benefits. Strong unions offered apprenticeships, and a large manufacturing sector provided opportunities for those without an advanced degree. A couple with a sole breadwinner could buy a home, raise a family, and send their kids to college. That was the American dream. Unfortunately, today, for too many Americans, it's not a possibility. So he's got like some language, there's like some logical language in there, right? Like the language of possibility is couched in it. But ultimately, he's telling us a story. He's telling us a story of what the American dream used to be, right? That's the narrative that he's giving us. And what's the conflict here? Well, the conflict is strong unions have gone away, right? There's no longer apprenticeships. That large manufacturing sector, whatever that was, it's gone now, right? This is the tension that's at the heart of this, right? There was once opportunity, but now that opportunity is gone, right? And whether or not you agree with his characterization of that, like, largely depends on, you know, are you identifying with this story about what accounts for the lack of opportunity, right? Part of what Bernie is claiming is a college degree is the new high school diploma. Why is that the case? Well, a lot of that depends on whether or not you find this story about why college is necessary, other than just a high school diploma. It accurately depicts the way that the society is now, right? If in this story that he's telling us in the before times, there were all these opportunities that you didn't necessarily have to have an advanced education for, because strong unions offered apprenticeships and manufacturing jobs were abundant, right? You didn't have to be a skilled professional with a highly advanced degree in order to get a good job and that's defined as a sole breadwinner could raise a family and send their kids to college, right? Now he's saying that this is no longer the case. This is come to pass. That this chapter is over, and now the story of the American dream is different, and you can't tell the story of the American dream and this attaining the middle classness of his thesis without now having a college degree, because having a college degree is now necessary to Bernie. So he's telling me this story about the American dream in order to set up the stakes of what he is going to claim is necessary and not necessary. And that's when he's going to get to his argument. And we'll come back to a little bit more of that in just a second. We don't really get the same kind of in-depth storytelling from Walsh, but we do get something kind of similar. Let's see. What does she talk about? Here we go. Towards the end here. Oh, no, it's not that part. Oh, okay. Here she tells us a story about which features prominently the tragedy of the commons. Or is it even earlier than this? No, this is the paragraph that I want. If they are unregulated by they, she means 2-year and 4-year universities. Low cost or no cost programs will likely experience a type of tragedy of the commons in which overconsumption leads to a depletion of resources and subsequent rationing of courses and programs. Tragedy of the commons is an economics term. It describes a situation, which I think she describes adequately well, in which lots of people have access to a scarce thing, and overconsumption leads to the destruction of that commodity. But it is also likely that students themselves may be part of the problem. When students are able to register with little or no personal cost, they might find it easier to walk away from a course or program than they would if they had paid for it. Behavioral economists, who refer to this as the sunk cost effect, find that people who have invested a significant amount of time, effort, or money in an endeavor are more likely to finish it for fear that they will waste what they have invested if they quit before it's completed. While economists might consider this to be irrational behavior, after all, the future benefits of an activity or endeavor are not tied to past investments. Its effects are widespread. Moreover, research confirms that a person's commitment to something increases with its monetary value. Hypothetically, then, the more a student pays for a college course, the more committed she will be to finishing the course so that she can get her, quote, money's worth. Now, there are parts of this, again, like Bernie, she's sort of using like logical language in some parts of this, and she's even at the end deferring to research, right? A little vaguely, research confirms. I'd like to know a little bit more about this research. But what she's doing here, especially right in the middle, is she's speculating. She's telling us a story about what free things mean to people versus what things people pay for mean to them, right? That's pathos, right? When students are able to register with little or no personal cost, they may find it easier to walk away. It's purely speculation, right? There's no evidence that this is based on, other than the idea of the sunk cost effect, which I usually hear of called the sunk cost fallacy, which is the idea that I have invested $100 in this class, therefore I must finish it because I invested this $100 in it, right? If you're not doing well, good common sense tells you you have to sacrifice that $100, right? And I find it interesting that she's using something that is demonstrably fallacious. She's using irrationality in service of proving a claim, which is like kind of the ignorance fallacy. But I think more important than that is that she's, this is kind of like an ethos and pathos move, right? If you're more inclined to believe that, you know what, people who get free things don't appreciate them as much as people that pay for things, then maybe you're finding this like ethos building and she's winning you to her side with her use of pathos. But I am here to tell you that this is not necessarily argument. This is storytelling about, what drives and motivates people. What do things mean, right? So again, right, and this isn't like, again, right, we're talking about like a couple of isolated statements here that are really like encapsulating this idea of conflict and tension at the heart of pathos. So we can look at some other stuff too, narrative devices, similes, and metaphors. We don't get a lot of similes or metaphors out of Bernie and Walsh, but I do want to talk about, before I move on to talk about anything that's going on in our today arguments, about point of view. Mostly, Walsh stays, part of her reasonable tone is the fact that she stays in such a consistent third person point of view. There's no first person statements. I mean, I could control F this, and I don't even think the word I doesn't even appear. Maybe we, that's not even part of the article. Any us, nothing, right? No first person. Does she even use the second person? She uses, no. The only second person is just down here. This isn't part of the article, right? She is so consistently in the third person. She has a very great command over her voice. And that voice in the third person has this inherent kind of authority to it. And that's part of the ethos. That's part of what we want out of academic writing. A lot of the proposals that I pointed out, your tone's too informal. It's too conversational. You're using too many you pronouns. It's like you're telling a friend of yours about a thing. Right, the formality of your tone is going to go a long way to informing your reader about like, oh, I find this person reasonable. Why are they reasonable? The reasonableness is coming from their point of view. Whereas with Bernie maintains a pretty consistent third person point of view as well, until one very crucial moment in the essay where he lays out his actual argument. And that is toward the end, or toward the middle, really. He's pretty consistently in the third person until he gets to here. And this is where we get his pronouns. In my view, right, the first personal pronoun, in my view, right? And this is why like the grammar of like sentences becomes important to rhetorical analysis, because I think like if you were to just take off in my view, right, like he's put a comma here, right? This is parenthetical. It's not important to the substance of the sentence. The sentence that he's writing is education is essential for personal and national well-being, right? That's his thesis statement, right? So this, in my view, that like he's couching his thesis in this personal pronoun my, but he's doing it in such a way that I can make this truth functional. I can rewrite this as a statement that has a true or false value, right? I can evaluate, okay, is educational actually essential for national and personal well-being? Well, that depends. What does he mean by personal and national well-being, right? Now we're getting into his argument, his chain of reasoning. And he presents this as a series of like conditional statements, but again, couched with this we pronoun. We live in a highly competitive world. We won't achieve, we need. This is we need again. But he moves from the personal pronoun to the plural first person. Now it's about what we desire. Now he's like sort of drawing us all in. He's talking about all of us together. He's including the reader. He's including the audience in his pronouns here, right? It's a very strategic pivot from they, my, we, right? Like he's moved very, very specifically on this to put his claims in this, like, these are the things that we believe, is one of the things you could say. That's pathos, right? There's logos going on in here because there's a lot of conditional statements that we're going to have, if you want to get to the heart of his logic, you're going to have to do a little bit of interpretation. But the plural first person, that is him telling us a story about the things that we share in common, the things that we live for, the things that we won't achieve as a society, the things that we need as a society, right? That's pathos. And so specific emotions, does the author, what do they want to intend their audience to feel? When we're talking about Walsh, there's definitely like this sense that she wants you to feel that paying for things makes things more worthwhile, right? And with Bernie wants you to feel that education is the most important part of a democratic society, right? It's fundamentally important. Those are the kinds of things that they want. So there's like two kinds of ways you can think about emotion or about tone here. Part of the thing is, how is the author establishing their tone towards the subject? Are they treating the subject with respect and objectivity? But then also, as a reader, what emotions are they inspiring in me as I'm reading through this language? When I read things like strong unions used to promote a sole breadwinner and a family that could achieve the American dream, maybe a particular kind of reader feels an intense sense of nostalgic pride for a time when unions made life better, right? Like it kind of depends. Like if you think unions are worthless communist shills, then you probably don't like Bernie Sanders' argument. Also, I think you're maybe being a little bit unfair to unions, but it kind of depends on how you feel about that, right? It kind of depends on what that specific word evokes for you. What you feel about maybe Misty read this and she was like, "Oh, the American dream is a sham, Bernie." Maybe that produced a different kind of feeling, right? So it kind of depends. There's like little different shades of nuance in what specific emotions is the author making you feel. There's kind of like what the author wants you to feel, but then there's all this like sort of unintended consequences of like how you encounter specific words and phrases. So that's why your reading of the pathos is important. What words and phrases stick out to you, and how do they color the specific emotional content, the emotional meaning that's going on, other than just like, as we talked about way back in the day, of the difference between emotional and cognitive content. Similarly, we could look at these two guys. We could talk about some of their ethos-based strategies, right? We could talk about how each of these authors are establishing an authoritative tone, or I definitely think that Nosowitz is this is a much more informal kind of argument. The language is more demonstrably informal, right? When he says that besides making the world seem like a darker place, one annual effect of daylight savings is the huge proliferation of articles proclaiming that daylight savings is a garbage idea that needs to end, right? That's pretty biased language, right? Saying that, oh, my opposition thinks that daylight savings is garbage, right? That's pretty informal language, right? Whereas, you read the first sentence of, I've never heard this guy's name said out loud. I'm just going to call him Hank. Hi, Hank. And Arena, it's that time of year when we spring ahead and switch to daylight savings time. There is a good chance that this annual adjustment of the clock will damage not only your wallet, but your health too, right? Immediately, we're like, we've got the we pronoun, right? So there's a little bit of like shifting tone there, but this is very much like, I'm about to make an argument. This is very much like the language of formalized argument. Before the adoption of standard measures of time, churches, city halls, and trains kept solar time, right? Almost immediately, the tone is, I'm explaining to you. The tone of this is very, you could say, this is like a teacherly, right? Didactic is a good word for if someone is teaching you something, giving you a good stern talking to. They're being referential. They're giving you information. They're informing. And they're doing it in a pretty formal way. And they pretty much stay in the third person almost completely throughout, except there are some basic parts where they turn away from the first person. we should scrap our current system, right? Doing that same sort of move as Bernie, that strategic, like, let me, whenever I'm making a point that maybe my audience disagrees to, I'll turn to them with the we pronoun. We clearly believe this, don't we? That's pathos, right? Like, that's just, that's telling you a story about what you believe. Also, it's really fun. This link takes you to their own website where they have a whole, like, they want to, like, they want to write a new calendar. Like, they want to do it big. It's really funny. They've got a whole way of interpreting the world, which I was really hostile to this argument. And I'll tell you why I kind of came around on it in just a little bit. But you could see, like, these other attributes of conversational language using hashtags, right? What is daylight savings time? It's a way to hashtag life hack ourselves into a pattern. Okay, it's pretty informal, right? Very conversational. And maybe that's part of his ethos building. Maybe that is resonating with you as a reader. Maybe this is like, this person, like, they get it. Like, they're talking to me like I identify with this kind of person, right? We could talk about Nozowitz's particular ethos. Like, I don't know who Dan Nozowitz is. That at no point in this article does he ever tell us that he has any particular credentials to talk about daylight savings time, right? I don't even know what a daylight savings time expert is called. There's a horologist who studies time, but they study, like, watches and instruments of time measurement. That's, like, part of it. The one guy that he uses, which I think this is a good ethos building idea, he focuses on David Prerow, author of Seize the Daylight, the curious and contentious story of daylight savings time. And he leans on this guy a couple of times. This guy is kind of almost every description I've ever found of this guy is he is he's like the eminent expert on daylight savings time, whatever that means. I guess he just knows the most about it. So he's, like, kind of a historian, but his degree is from MIT in physics. I don't know. How do you become an expert on daylight savings time? It's, like, still kind of weird to me. These guys, if we scroll down to the bottom, we get a little bit of information that this guy's a senior fellow at the Troubled Currencies Project. This guy works for the Applied Institute of Economics at Johns Hopkins. These guys are economists, right? They deal with time in the sense that they deal with economies, and economies use time. I don't know if I would, like, call them experts on time simply because they're economists and they use time. I don't know. But the tone that they strike is definitely more of a, hey, listen to us. We are authorities on this idea, right? Whereas this is, hey man, I'm just a guy. Like, look at these other sources, right? They've got, like, look at this loopy idea about daylight savings time, man. Like, this guy knows a lot about time, right? Like, that's this guy's tone. It's a little less formal. It's a little less like I have all the answers, and that might be more or less effective to you, right? Maybe you read this and you're like, oh, here's a guy who seems kind of humble, and that's a selling point of his ethos. He's using lots of other people to stand on the claims that they're making. He's not trying to stand on his own ethos to make these. Maybe you find these guys don't use nearly as many sources, right? Or they use a lot of their own credibility to, like, a lot of this historical stuff. They don't cite anybody, right? This is just off the dome for these guys. But they do turn to, again, we get this strategy of using links, right? We've got a poll here. This is a CBS poll. Dislike twice a year time changes. You're part of a large majority of Americans, right? It's up to you to decide, if 70% of Americans approve of something, is that reason to accept it, or is that a bandwagon fallacy, right? Just because 70% of people approve of it, does it make it right? It makes it popular. What is popular is not always necessarily right. Could it be they're onto something? So begging the question fallacy, but that's fine. This whole thing about social jet lag, no sources cited for that, really. This stuff about increased risk of heart disease, they are citing some sources for this, right? They're citing the Radio Health Journal. I don't know what this is, but I don't like it. They cite it like 2 or 3 times. I don't know what the Radio Health Journal is. I'd have to do a little bit more research into them. It's definitely not an academic journal. Increased heart risk. This is a Wall Street Journal article. Wall Street Journal is fine. It kind of depends on what they're reporting on. It's behind a paywall. I can't read that. fatal car crashes increase. You'll notice some of these claims are current biology. Okay, that's fine. That's an academic journal, right? Okay, that's interesting. A chronobiological evaluation of the acute effects of daylight saving times on traffic accident risk. I'd have to read that, or at least the abstract, to get an idea of whether or not they're actually straw manning that, or they're misrepresenting or making hasty generalizations out of it. But some of their sources is kind of a mixed bag. Some of them seem to be going to academic journals. Some of them just kind of seem to be like going to some radio show that they like a lot. I don't know. I don't know what that one is. This one, we get, it's again another mixed bag. We've got a 2012 study, which if we chase that one down, this is a Gizmodo article. Gizmodo, it's not the Wall Street Journal, but it's not Radio Health Journal, I guess. It's somewhere in between those two. It kind of depends on what they're saying about something else. Gizmodo, I guess they're fine. Heart attacks are much more likely. This is an academic journal. This is Circulation. Again, that's a good source. It all kind of comes down to National Institutes of Health. Like, these are fine. Benefits of sunlight, a bright spot for human health. We could talk about how these actually fit into the argument. Some of these things, like Bernie and Walsh before, some of them are a little bit better, right? This is some good signaling phrasing. A 2015 paper from the Brookings Institute. That's nice. But elsewhere, when a 2012 study indicated, right, without that hyperlink, that's not really giving me a lot of information. I think they could have been a little bit better about that. So I think, it's more or less kind of a mixed bag, again, with, the way that they're using sources. I think one of the things we can take away from this too is the way that they're framing the actual issue. Where is it? Right here. Noswitz says, critics of daylight savings time often focus their criticism around those 2 days per year, citing confusion, schedule disruption, and even health problems. And he goes on to diffuse each one of these, breaking down why, almost in this order, why it's not just 2 days a year. There's the schedule disruption. I don't know if he actually does go into schedule disruption, but he does try to dismiss some of these health problems, and that's some of the stuff that that these guys are talking about, is that these would map onto these what are they at? These schedule disruptions, right? That's that social jet lag that they're talking about. He's also talking about like the increased risks for different heart diseases, right? This is the health problems that he seems to be alluding to. So like, these guys are actually talking about the thing in the way that this person has framed the criticism. So, on the whole, I think that these articles are in conversation in a pretty meaningful way. The one thing that these guys don't talk about, that this guy does talk about, is this idea. Absent daylight savings for 8 months per year, our days would not be structured to enjoy the most sunlight as possible. This is not a feature of Hank and Arena's argument. They don't seem to care whether or not people just enjoy sunlight. It's not a thing that they ever even bring up, right? They're purely focused on the negative health benefits, this fact of social jet lag, and the idea that daylight savings interrupts our circadian rhythms, right? Which at the very least, I think that, it kind of comes down to what's this Pathos story that you're being told about how nice sunlight is, right? This is a story that we're being told. Our mornings would be bright and cheerful, but the sun would tend, all right, he's talking about what it would be like without daylight savings time. Our mornings would be bright and cheerful, but the sun would tend to set before we leave work each day. This stinks. This gives the average 9 to 5 adult very little time to enjoy sunlight. So during the spring, summer, and early autumn, we tweak it just a bit so there's more sunlight in the evening. In the winter, we abandon daylight savings time because there just isn't enough sunlight to make a difference. Winter is pretty much a dark hell world, no matter how it's scheduled. Winter daylight savings time would give us very, very late sunrise and not enough light in the evening to provide for the effects we want. Now, whether or not you found this argument persuasive probably hinges very much on do you agree that these are the effects that you are included in that set of we, that these effects are pleasurable to, right? Do you like sunlight during the daylight savings part of the year more than any possible, and does that pleasure that you derive from more sunlight in the summer months, does that actually override the possible drawbacks? Which one of the things he says, like the actual claim that he's making, you know, the main argument, he's kind of deceptive about it. He says his main argument is like, the important thing about daylight savings is it's like weird and cool. That's not actually his argument. His argument is that even though it certainly isn't perfect, it's extremely hard to argue that daylight savings on the whole does more harm than good. And so a lot of his essay is diffusing these criticisms that these kind of guys are leveling, that it does harm us more than it helps us. It does interrupt our circadian rhythms. It does increase heart risk. It does produce economic impacts, right? This is the part where, you know, as economists, this is the one criticism that really stands out as like really salient to me. Like economists claiming that something costs a lot of money. Okay, that's where their ethos is really coming to bear on these kinds of claims. I'm a little bit more compelled by this reasoning than I am that like daylight, they're also telling us a story, right? They're telling us a story that the one true rhythm in the world is our natural circadian rhythms. Where does he say it? Social jet lag, social jet lag. There we go. Daylight savings time, along with time zones, it's this paragraph right here, is a major contributor to what's known as social jet lag. Social jet lag occurs as a result of the difference between one's biological clock, read circadian rhythm, which is determined by natural phenomena, such as when the sun is up or down, and one's social clock, which is determined by man-made schedules and time structures, such as the 9-to-5 workday, time zones, and daylight saving. Daylight savings contribution to social jet lag exacerbates the difference, so a fancy way of saying it makes worse, between our biological and social clocks by an additional hour, causing a mismatch between our sleep and wake rhythms and our body's other physiological functions. In short, with the annual rejection of our natural circadian rhythm, our body clocks are thrown out of whack, resulting, among other things, in serious damage to our health. Okay, calm down, Dr. Circadian Rhythm. First of all, one fallacy we're not going to talk about is the naturalistic fallacy. The appeal to something is right because it is natural, which seems to be exactly what these guys are going for, just because there's some sort of traditional natural movement of the sun that is the better option for us. Quite frankly, like, you know, all schedules are somewhat artificial. Like, so this idea that there is one true natural circadian rhythm is a little bit, I think, disingenuous and kind of an oversimplification. But they're telling us a story about what happens when we reject the truth to our bodies, and that's pathos. And I would argue fallacious, but that's fine. But they're basically just telling us a story about this social clock, right? And maybe if they're using some sources to back this kind of thing up, or, you know, then we could talk about how it would be logos, but this is purely just telling us a story about social jet lag and what it does to us. I'm much more compelled by like appeals like this to, you know, the amount of money lost. This is interesting. You know, is there increased, you know, is it actually true that daylight saving time increases or decreases, you know, increases our risk for stuff? You know, I don't know how compelling I find this. I think he complicates that. You know, in the same way, I don't necessarily buy this argument that the main benefit, aside from the fact that like daylight's like real pretty, is that there's a reduction in crime that attends daylight savings. A 2015 paper from Brookings found that there's a 7% decrease in crime following the shift to daylight savings. That's interesting. Okay, go on. The drop resulted in an estimated $59 million in savings from robberies not committed. that seems like that's just speculation, right? How do we know how much money was saved from things that didn't happen? I don't know. I mean, yeah, you can estimate, but if you include crimes for which we must estimate dollar amounts, such as rape, that number goes up to 240 million. I don't know what he means by that. I guess maybe in damages awarded to victims in potential court cases. I'm not particularly comfortable putting a dollar amount on the cost of rape, but these estimates involve medical costs, prosecutions, police expenses, that kind of thing. Okay. The reason is simple. Crimes tend to happen much more often in darkness. Extend the daylight and crimes, especially outdoor crimes like muggings, go down. I feel like he's kind of telling me a story about crime here. It might be broadly true that some kinds of crimes are more likely to be committed in the dark, but he's saying crimes. He's being a little bit too overly enthusiastic with this term, right? Like, I don't think daylight savings affects white collar fraud, for instance. I don't think there are less Ponzi schemes going down because of daylight savings. There's not fewer like blessing looms taking money from people because of daylight savings. Fewer MLMs being founded. I don't know. He tends to think of crime as only like violent stranger on stranger crime. I don't know. I feel like he's just kind of talking about crime in a more storytelling kind of way. I'd be interested in what the Brookings Institute actually says about this. Fighting crime with daylight savings, and I'm not going to read this right now. That's way too long, but the point is, it's, that's an interesting thing. It falls very far from being like making his argument a slam dunk for sure. And I think he's like kind of marrying logos and pathos in a way here that is kind of muddying the waters a bit. Really, this is the only, when we get to logos, we can pivot back and talk about his actual argument. This is really the only benefit that he points to, right? Daylight savings has more benefits than harms. This is the only, he says, let's talk benefits. There is a vague reduction in crime. That's it. Other than that, it is the idea that if you don't think that, winter is a dark hell world, then that's not a benefit, right? And again, that's pathos, right? If you're like, yes, winter is the dark hell world, and I am the dark hell lord, right? Then maybe that seems more beneficial to you, right? As Mike was saying, I just hate when I wake up and the sun is out, but when I get home from work, it's dark. Maybe that's compelling to you, right? If that's compelling to you, then maybe you're more willing to abide this as a benefit, right? The earth is going to tilt. There is literally a longer duration of sunlight during part of the year on part of the earth. But it's also a far cry, again, when we talk about logos, from this idea that he introduces up here. Daylight savings has become the norm. Objection, hearsay. The norm for whom? It's the norm for most of North America and most of the United States, excluding Arizona, much of Canada, excluding I think Ontario or Alberta, some province of Canada that nobody cares about. Sorry, Canadians, and Mexico and Europe. That's it. Most of the world doesn't use daylight savings time. So, it's the norm if you're talking about a very specific place, but, that's a norm for here, right? Most people don't use daylight savings time. Most people that have used daylight savings time have stopped using daylight savings time. And he also mentions part of this appeal to people just liking sun. In reality, daylight savings is an 8-month experiment designed to make life, more pleasurable. The basic idea, in the Western world, we typically spend more time awake in the evenings and mornings. And I would raise the question here, what does that mean? That like people in the East, which sounds suspiciously Orientalist, like they don't like daylight? I don't know what you're trying to say here. Like, why are we making this arbitrary distinction between the East and the West? I mean, maybe there's a fact about the Eastern Hemisphere that I'm not aware of, but that certainly hasn't compelled like many other parts of the Western Hemisphere of accepting daylight savings. This is a phenomenon usually particular to the Northwestern Hemisphere of the globe has accepted daylight savings time, and parts of the Southeast, like Australia, has like summertime that they go on, but their seasons are reversed, so they do daylight savings backwards, like their toilets, right? You go, oh, it goes the other way. I'm lying. That doesn't really happen. But I think the water swirls in the opposite direction. I don't know. Typhoons turn in a different direction than hurricanes. I'm not a meteorologist. Okay. The point is, I think there's some biases that come through in Nozowitz's article. I think it's a little bit more reliant on this pathos appeal. It's a little bit more reliant on telling you a story about how great daylight is. And that's essentially it. Whereas these guys, I think, are trying to make an argument that's a little bit more based on logos and ethos, right? They're really basing their argument on their own point, their own authority. I don't think they explain how this changeover would happen very well. I was infuriated trying to figure out what they were explaining. We should scrap our current system in favor of worldwide adoption of coordinated universal time, also known as Greenwich Mean Time. That's no longer true. GMT is not equivalent to UTC, but that's beside the point. This would mean that everyone's watches around the world would be set at exactly the same time. The only difference is they would notice, depending on where they are located, where would be the sun is in the sky at a particular hour. Thus, midday would be as it is today in all parts of the world when the sun reaches its highest point in the sky. What would be different under UTC is the time on your watch. In New York, midday would no longer be 12 p.m., but rather 5 p.m. But everywhere it would be 1700 UTC. So at first, this sounded like this was just like moving the goalposts on the argument. I was like, how is this actually fixing the issue? Because there's literally more daylight. There's a longer duration of daylight during some parts of the year than others. And that seems to be a more compelling way that this guy has framed the debate. That, like, even if you don't like daylight, it is kind of irrefutable that part of the year has more sunlight available for a longer stretch than other parts. And that's like kind of the thing that daylight savings is more addressing, right? Is the idea that how do we take advantage of the fact that there's more sunlight hitting the earth for a longer duration of time? Can we do that? One of the things that I don't like about these guys' arguments is they just kind of ignore that. And they don't admit that that is also a reason why we're doing it. For them, the only reason we're doing daylight savings is related to this idea that in today's technological world, we're plugged into whether or not the sun is up. As a result, the original energy conservation rationale for daylight savings no longer makes sense, right? According to them, the only reason we have daylight savings is because back in the day, we only had candles and there was no electricity. And in order to better take advantage of what light there was, we instituted daylight savings time to conserve our, use of candles in the dark and fuel consumption and things like that. But now that we have electricity, we can turn on lights and stuff. So we don't need daylight savings. But I think that kind of ignores an important thing that, like, even if you disagree with the way that this guy's saying, like, daylight's really cool, it is ignoring the fact that during part of the year, there's just a longer duration of sunlight. And that's part of why we're adjusting. That's part of the thing that we're adjusting to. It's not just purely this idea that, like, well, we're all standardizing time. It'll all be the same time, right? Like, when you take daylight savings away, I think to really get to the heart of what these two guys are really, or three guys technically, or it's a handicap match, it's 2-on-1, what they're really getting at, right? Like, it's 7:59, it's 8 o'clock now, right? We set our clocks forward back in, what was it, March 12th was daylight savings, March 12th, 13th, something like that. So ever since then, we've been running an hour later than our natural circadian rhythms have been, right? So theoretically right now, it should be, what, 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock? It should be just turning to 7 o'clock now before we sprang forward. I know it hurts, which would mean that it would be getting dark right now. And by 8 o'clock, it would be pitch black outside. And then the sun would come up tomorrow, since we're in the longest part of the year, the sun is rising earlier than any other part of the year. It would be daylight by 5:30 a.m. or something like that. Or definitely by 5:45, right? Before 6 a.m. it would be daylight. So the daylight hours would be 6 a.m. to 7:30 or something like that. You know, is it that big? That's the real question when mitigating between things, is like, is that extra hour of sunlight worth it? Do you do anything with that? I don't know. That's something I thought was missing from both of these. I would be really curious on some logos-based evidence that talked about what percentage of people who use daylight savings take advantage of the extra hour of daylight afforded 8 months out of the year. That'd be interesting. I don't know. None of these arguments are addressing that. One of them's telling me a story about how cool daylight is. One of them's telling me a story about like the true natural rhythm of the world. So I think they're both kind of like fueled a little bit on pathos. Again, not like extensively, right? Like they're not writing us novels for sure, but the pathos appeal, I think, is coming through in the way that they're framing this issue, the way that these guys are like, look, this is about what's natural, and this guy is about, this is about what is pleasurable, right? Both of those are like very pathos-based appeals. And we could talk about like the actual argument claims that they're making, but we're just not going to have time because our time is slowly running out. That's basically everything I want to cover about this. One thing that we could pivot back to real quick is, does this author use exaggeration or humor? I think, you know, there are definitely points where this person is can be humorous. This person is not so humorous. And, you know, humor is a way of winning you over to somebody's side. We're much more pleased by people that make us laugh. We like those people. And we're willing to, listen to whatever. We might have, like, I don't know, giant blind spots by people that are amusing and funny to us about what, the things that they're actually saying. Also, the reason, humor is one of those things, like, just because people are laughing at something doesn't necessarily mean that it's funny in a weird way. Like, laughter doesn't always indicate that, like, you enjoyed a thing. Laughter can, some people can't even explain why they're laughing exactly, or why something was funny exactly. Or they'll say something like, it's funny because it's true. And it's like, well, that actually has no descriptive power. Like, there are plenty of things that are true that aren't funny. Like, the truth of a thing doesn't make it funny. So that's weird. It's the representation and the context that really make it funny. Or maybe it's that I'm in a room of people that are laughing, and so I'm more primed to laugh, right? Maybe it's just Pavlovian or something. But the point of this is that, just because if somebody's winning you over with their humor, that's part of their pathos appeal. Likewise, if somebody tells, I don't know if you've ever been to, like, anybody ever been to a stand-up comedy show? Shaking your head.
Not in person, but I've watched a whole one before.
Right, watching stand-up comedy or maybe going to one. It's a little bit different experience going to one, because you feel like watching jokes that aren't funny, you can just change the channel. Feeling a comedian bombing it is such a tragic experience. Like, it's like no one can escape. It's like watching a plane crash. It's horrible. And they just have to do, it's like, okay, there's 2 more minutes. I'm just going to keep telling these horrible jokes. Go to, like, an open mic night, like an amateur comedy night. Whoa, it is brutal. These are not funny jokes. And you feel the crowd being lost by the comedian, right? Like, humor can have a downside, right? If you lose somebody for humor, that's negative pathos, right? You're not winning somebody to your side. You're not listening, even if what they're saying does happen to be true, right? If their humor alienates you, if you feel like, oh, they're just insulting people, like, maybe it's something off-putting about that, and, like, you lose the crowd, it's possible to get them back, right? So humor is kind of a double-edged sword in that sense. On that note, I will go ahead and end this there. I'll go ahead and stop our recording.